The smoke in the gaming room of the Velacourt townhouse hung so thick that the candle flames wore halos, and through it, Eleanor Fairfax watched her father's hand tremble as he reached for the last card in the deck. His fingers, once so steady when he had taught her to press flowers between the pages of his ledgers, shook now, like the last leaf of autumn refusing to fall. She stood pressed against the papered wall where the servants had been told to keep her, close enough to hear the wet click of his throat when he swallowed, and she understood with a cold and perfect clarity that whatever her father laid upon that table tonight, it would not be coin, because there was no coin left. There had been no coin left for a month. The room was full of men who smelled of brandy and bergamot and something older beneath it, the sour reek of desperation dressed in silk. At the head of the table sat Lord Ambrose Vane, and he did not tremble. He never trembled. He had the loose, unhurried ease of a man who had already counted the money in every purse in the room and found it his. When his pale eyes drifted across the smoke to where she stood, Eleanor felt the look land on her skin like a hand she had not given permission to touch, and her pulse leapt at her throat, and she made herself go still, the way a hare goes still in the open field, as though stillness alone might make her invisible. "You have nothing to stake, Fairfax," Lord Vane said, and his voice was almost gentle, which was the worst of it. "You have nothing at all, unless—" He did not finish. He let his gaze finish for him, sliding once more to the girl against the wall, and Eleanor's father turned in his chair and looked at her, and in his ruined, red-rimmed eyes, she saw the exact moment the last of the man she loved gave way to the thing that fear had made of him. She did not know yet the name of the man who would win her. She only knew, watching her father's mouth open to speak, that her life was about to be handed across a card table like a purse of someone else's gold. The words her father said were quiet. The room was not quiet after them. Someone laughed, a short, ugly bark, and someone else murmured that it could not be done, that a gentleman did not wager his own daughter, and Lord Vane smiled and said that a gentleman did a great many things behind these doors that daylight would not recognize. And all the while Eleanor stood with her spine against the cold wall and felt the floor tilt slowly beneath her slippers. She thought of running. She measured the distance to the door with her eyes and found it guarded by a footman in Vane's livery, and she understood that the running had already been thought of and prevented before she had even arrived. So she did not run. She lifted her chin instead, because it was the only thing left that belonged entirely to her, and she looked at Lord Ambrose Vane with all the contempt a merchant's granddaughter could summon, and she watched something flicker behind his pleasant face. Not shame, she would learn, for he had none, but appetite, sharpened by her defiance into something worse. "She has spirit," Vane said softly. "I do so enjoy breaking spirit." Eleanor's father made a sound then, a small, broken sound, but he did not rise from his chair. That was the thing she would carry longest out of that room. Not the smoke, not the laughter, not even Vane's eyes. The way her father did not rise. The cards were dealt, the stake was set, and in the far corner, where the candlelight scarcely reached, a man who had said nothing all evening set down his glass. He had been there the whole time. Eleanor realized it only now. The way one realizes a shadow in a room has been a person all along. He sat apart from the others, a tall man in dark, plain clothes cut too well to be plain, and he had watched the game with the flat patience of someone who did not care whether he won or lost. She had taken him for another of Vane's creatures. She saw now that she had been wrong. The other men leaned toward Vane like plants toward the sun. This man leaned toward nothing. He simply watched, and now that Eleanor's fate lay on the table, he had at last decided to move. "I'll play the hand," the man said. The room turned to him. Lord Vane's smile did not falter, but it changed, the way still water changes when something moves beneath it. "Your Grace," Vane said, "I did not think this was a game to your taste." Eleanor looked at the stranger and thought, "Your Grace," and the two words rearranged the room around him. A duke. She did not know his name, but she knew the shape of the power in it, and she felt something in her chest go tight and wary, because in her experience, power had never once arrived in her life to save her. It had only ever arrived to take. "It is not to my taste," the Duke said. "That is precisely why I am playing." He rose, and he was very tall, and the candlelight found the hard line of his jaw and the faint white seam of an old scar that ran from the corner of his left eye down into the shadow of his cheek. He crossed the room without hurry and took the empty chair across from Vane, and he did not once look at Eleanor. And somehow that was the first kindness anyone had shown her all night, that he did not look at her as though she were a purse or a prize or a thing. "Name your stake then," Vane said, dealing. And the Duke of Merrick reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper and laid it flat upon the green baize and said, in a voice with no heat in it at all, "All of it, Merrick Hall, the lands, the income, every farthing I possess against the girl. She is worth all of it." The room went utterly silent. Eleanor did not understand. She stood with her back to the wall and her heart slamming, and she could not make the words mean anything because they did not fit any story she had ever been told. Men did not stake dukedoms on kitchen maids and merchants' daughters. Men did not look at her as though she were worth a great house and the fields around it and the roofs of every tenant who worked them. She waited for the trick in it. She had lived long enough to know that when something looked like rescue, the price of it was always written somewhere in ink too small to read until it was far too late. But there was no time to find the trick. Lord Vane's eyes had lit with a terrible greed, a dukedom, a whole dukedom, laid open before him. And greed makes a man reckless, and reckless men lose. Eleanor watched the cards turn. She did not breathe. She watched Vane's confident hand falter and his jaw tighten, and the pleasant mask slide from his face to reveal the small, furious animal beneath. And she watched the Duke of Merrick lay down his cards, one by one, as calmly as a man laying flowers on a grave. He won. For one long moment nobody moved. Then Lord Vane surged half out of his chair with an oath, and the Duke lifted his eyes at last, and whatever was in them stopped Vane where he stood. "She is mine now," Merrick said quietly. "By your own game, before your own witnesses, you will let her walk out of that door, or I will have every man in this room swear to what was wagered and what was lost, and you will be finished in every drawing room from here to Bath." And Eleanor, who had come into this room the property of one cruel man, walked out of it the property of another, except that the second man did not once touch her, did not take her arm, did not so much as glance at her as she passed, but only held the door and stood aside and let her go first into the cold, clean air of the street, as though she were a lady and he her servant. She did not know his face. She did not know why he had done it. She only knew, standing on the wet cobbles beneath the guttering lamps, that she had been handed from one hand to another like a coin, and that this time, for reasons she could not fathom, the hand had opened to let her stand on her own 2 feet. Behind her, the townhouse door closed on the smoke and the men. Before her, the Duke's carriage waited in the rain, and Eleanor Fairfax, who had learned never to trust a rescue, stepped toward it with her whole body braced for the price. The carriage did not go to any place she knew. It carried her out past the last lamps of the city, past the toll gates, into a countryside black and streaming with rain, and Eleanor sat pressed into the far corner of the seat, with her hands knotted in her lap, and every muscle strung tight as harp wire, waiting. The Duke sat across from her. He had not spoken since the townhouse. He looked out the window at the dark as though she were not there, and the not looking, which had felt like kindness in that terrible room, began now to feel like something else, a wall, deliberate and thick, and she could not tell what stood behind it. "You may speak, if it eases you," he said at last, still watching the rain, "or you may be silent. I make no claim on your words. You have made a claim on everything else," Eleanor said, and was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Now he looked at her. The carriage lamp swung, and the light slid across the scar at his eye, and she made herself hold his gaze, though her heart was a wild thing in her chest. "I have made no claim on you at all," he said. "Whatever that man believed he was selling, I did not buy. There is no debt between us. You owe me nothing, not gratitude, not your person, not a single hour of your life. When we reach Merrick Hall, you will have a room with a lock on the inside of the door, and the key will be yours, and in the morning, if you wish to be taken anywhere in England, I will see you taken there and provided for. That is all." Eleanor stared at him. The words were too large. They would not fit through the narrow door that years of hard experience had built in her. "Men do not do such things," she said, for nothing. Something moved across his face, not offense, but a kind of weary recognition, as though she had named a truth he had long ago made peace with. "No," he agreed, "they do not." And he turned back to the window and said nothing more, and left the space where an explanation should have been hanging in the dark between them, unfilled. Merrick Hall rose out of the storm like something dreamed. Eleanor had imagined a house cold and grand and full of watching eyes, but the servants who met the carriage were few and quiet, and they did not stare at her, and she understood after a moment that they had been told not to. A grey-haired housekeeper with a gentle, unsurprised face showed her up a great curving stair to a room that was warm and clean and larger than the whole of the lodgings she had shared with her father, and there was indeed a lock on the inside of the door, new brass bright against the old wood, as though it had been fitted that very day. She turned the key. It moved smooth and true. She stood with her hand upon it a long time, and then she sat down upon the edge of the bed, in her ruined slippers and her one good gown, and she did not weep, because she had taught herself long ago that weeping cost more than it returned. But her hands would not stop shaking, and she pressed them flat against her knees to still them, and she stared at the fire someone had built for her, and she waited for the world to reveal its trick. It did not come that night. It did not come the next. The days at Merrick Hall arranged themselves around her with a strange, careful courtesy. A tray was brought each morning. She was never summoned. When she ventured at last from her room, no one barred her way, and no one demanded to know her business, and the great house opened before her. Long galleries hung with dim portraits, a conservatory gone half to jungle, and a library, oh, a library, 2 stories of it, ladders on brass rails, and the smell of leather and dust and old paper that was the smell of the only truly happy hours of her childhood, before the debts, before the fear. She found the Duke there on the 3rd day. He was standing at the far window with a book he was not reading, looking out over the sodden lawns, and when she came in he did not turn, but she saw his shoulders change, a small tightening, then a deliberate ease, as though he had made himself relax by force. "I was told I might use the library," she said. "If I was wrong." "You were not wrong." Now he turned. In daylight, the scar was fainter than she had thought, an old healed thing, but his eyes were the same, dark, guarded, tired, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Read whatever you like. Most of these have not been opened in 20 years. A pause. "My father collected them to look learned before his guests. I keep them because burning them seemed a cruelty to the books." It was the most he had said to her at once, and there was something buried in it. A father, a house full of pretending, a boy who had noticed the pretending and hated it. Eleanor filed the fragment away without knowing why. She crossed to the shelves and let her hand drift along the spines, and she felt his eyes on her back. And for the first time, the weight of being watched did not frighten her, because she understood he was not watching her the way Vane had watched her. He was watching her the way a man watches something he does not expect to keep. "You still think there is a trick," he said quietly. Her hand went still on a green leather spine. "Yes, there is not." He set his own book down. "But I will not ask you to believe me. Belief cannot be handed across a table like a steak. It has to be won, and slowly, and I have not the smallest notion how to begin." Something almost like humor crossed his face and vanished. "I am told I am not an easy man to be near." "Who told you that?" "Everyone," he said. "Whoever left." And he inclined his head and walked out, and left her alone among the 10,000 books. And Eleanor stood there with her heart doing something new and unwelcome in her chest, some soft, treacherous unclenching, and she thought, with real alarm, "This is more dangerous than Lord Vane." Vane only wanted to break her. This man was doing something far worse. He was making her hope. She did not know yet what had made him. She only knew that when he said the word left, something in his voice had gone thin as ice over deep water, and that she had wanted, absurdly, to ask him who, and had not dared. The weeks turned, and a shape came into her days. She read in the mornings. In the afternoons, when the rain lifted, she walked the grounds, and she began without quite deciding to set the ruined conservatory to rights, clearing the dead vines, repotting the survivors, coaxing the great glass room back toward the garden it had once been. The gardeners, uncertain at first, came to defer to her. She had her grandfather's hands and her grandfather's patience, and green things had always trusted her more readily than people. There was a peace in the work that she had not known since childhood, the good clean ache of earth under her nails, and the slow reward of a leaf uncurling, where a week before there had been only rot, and she found, to her own quiet astonishment, that she had stopped flinching every time a door opened behind her. Once, coming up the path with mud to her elbows, she caught sight of the Duke at an upper window, watching her, and he did not look away when she saw him, and she did not look away either, and for a moment, the length of the wet lawn between them seemed no distance at all. Then he lifted one hand, not a summons, not a claim, only a greeting, the smallest thing, and something in Eleanor's chest turned over and would not turn back. And in the evenings, more and more, she found herself in the library at the hour the Duke came to it, and neither of them ever said they had come to find the other, and both of them knew. They spoke of books first, because books are safe, then of the estate, its tenants, the drainage of the low fields, a matter he clearly knew to the last shilling, and cared about with a fierceness he showed nothing else. Then, one night, of nothing in particular, only the long, comfortable talk of two people discovering that their silences fit together as neatly as their words. She learned his name was Julian. She never used it. It felt like a key to a room she was not yet brave enough to enter. She learned other things without being told, that he rose before the servants and rode the estate alone in the grey dawn, that he gave money quietly to a village he never visited, that he had no friends who called and no family who wrote, and that a whole wing of the house stood shut and shrouded, and that the servants lowered their voices when they passed its doors. And she learned, one wet grey afternoon, the edge of the wound in him. They had been speaking of marriage, of an alliance among the neighbouring gentry, a girl of 17 sold to a man of 60 for the sake of joined estates, and Eleanor had said, with more heat than she intended, that it was no better than what Vane had done to her, dressed in lace and called respectable. And the Duke had gone very still, and then he had said, in a voice scraped down to nothing, "I know, I did it once." Eleanor waited. The fire snapped. Outside, the rain. "I married where I was told to marry," he said. "A great match. 2 fortunes joined. 2 families pleased. She was clever and cold, and she wanted a title. And I wanted." He stopped. "I wanted to be wanted. I was young enough to think the 2 things were the same. They are not." He turned the ring on his smallest finger, a habit she had noticed and never understood until now. She spent 4 years telling me, in 100 small daily ways, that I was a bore, a brute, a thing to be endured for the sake of the settlement. And I believed her, because a man believes the person who shares his bed. When she died, his jaw worked. When she died, I felt only relief, and I have never forgiven myself for it. That is the whole of me, Miss Fairfax. A man who was glad his wife was dead. Now you know why I do not ask you to believe there is no trick. I have not the character to be trusted. I only have the wish to be. He had never once raised his voice. That was what undid her. He laid the ugliest thing about himself on the table between them, the way he had laid his fortune on the baize, flat and open, and asking nothing. Eleanor found she had crossed half the room without deciding to. She stood before his chair, and she did not know what she meant to do. And in the end, she did the only thing that was true. She reached out, and she laid her bare hand over his, where it worried at the ring, and she held it still. It was the first time she had touched him. It was the first time she suspected that anyone had touched him in kindness, in a very long while, for she felt the shock of it go through him like a current, felt his whole hand go rigid beneath hers, and then, slowly, terribly, turn over, so that his palm lay open against hers, and his fingers closed, and a man who feared nothing in a gaming room full of jackals held on to her hand as though it were the only fixed thing in a falling world. Neither of them spoke. The fire burned low, and Eleanor understood, with the hand of the Duke of Merrick shaking faintly in her own, that she had fallen a great deal further than she had ever meant to, and that she had no idea at all whether he could ever let himself fall after her. The scandal, when it came dressed as a morning caller. She was in the conservatory when the carriage rolled up the drive, a fine crested thing, and from it stepped a woman Eleanor would come to know as Lady Prudence Halstead, the dead Duchess's sister, and by her side a lean, smiling gentleman Eleanor recognized at once, though it took her breath away to see him here, in daylight, in this place that had begun to feel like safety. Lord Ambrose Vane. He had found her. Of course he had found her. Men like Vane did not lose gracefully. They merely waited, and gathered allies, and returned. They did not come to reclaim her. They came to ruin her, which was cleaner and crueler, and left no fingerprints. By nightfall it was everywhere. Eleanor heard it first from the housekeeper's careful, unhappy face, and then in the too loud silence of the servants, and then, at last, from the Duke himself, who came to the library with a folded news sheet in his hand, and his face like carved stone. The story had been placed in every scandal column that mattered. The Duke of Merrick, it said, had won a merchant's daughter in a game of cards, and kept her at his country seat for his private use. A fallen woman, a kept woman, living openly under his roof, without so much as the fig leaf of a chaperone. Lady Halstead, grieving still for her sister, was said to be prostrate with shame at the dishonor done to her family's name, and Lord Vane, that friend of virtue, had felt it his sad duty to confirm the tale. "They have made you a whore," the Duke said, and the word came out of him like something torn. "In print, in every house in London, because of me, because I sat down at that table. You sat down at that table to save me, and in saving you, I have destroyed you." He set the paper down with a care that was worse than violence. "There is a way to mend it. There is only one, and I will not offer it to you, because if I offer it now, it becomes exactly the thing they accuse me of. A great man, forcing a ruined girl to the altar to tidy his own scandal. You would spend the rest of your life believing you had been bought, after all. I would rather be slandered forever than have you think that." Eleanor stood very still. The room was full of the thing neither of them would name. "Then do not offer it," she said, as amending. Her heart was beating so hard she thought he must hear it. "Offer it as a wish." He looked at her, and for the first time since the gaming room, she saw the guard come all the way down, saw straight through into the frightened, hoping, ruined and mending man beneath, and he opened his mouth. And Lady Halstead's voice cut through the house like a blade, calling for the Duke, her heels sharp on the marble, and the moment shattered like dropped glass, and he closed his mouth, and the guard came up, and he turned to face the door, with the whole cold weight of his rank settling back onto his shoulders, like armor. "Stay here," he said. "Whatever you hear, stay here." But Eleanor did not stay. She followed him to the head of the great stair, and stood in the shadow of a pillar, and below her, in the marble hall, she saw them arranged like a tribunal. Lady Halstead in grey, Vane at her shoulder, and 3 of the neighbouring gentry brought along as witnesses to the Duke's disgrace. And she heard Vane's smooth voice offer the Duke his terms. Send the girl away, quietly, tonight, with a sum to keep her quiet, and let it be understood that she had never been more than a passing folly, and the family would let the matter die, or keep her, and be cut by every house in England, and drag the honoured name of Merrick through the gutter for the sake of a card table trollop. "Choose," Vane said pleasantly. "Your name or your... what is she? You cannot even say the word, can you? There isn't a respectable one." And the Duke of Merrick was silent so long that Eleanor's heart began to break, standing there in the shadows, because she knew what a name like his was worth, and what she was worth beside it. A merchant's daughter won in a hand of cards, and she thought, he will choose the name. Any man would choose the name. And she loved him enough, in that ruinous moment, to hope he would, so that at least one of them might be left standing when this was done. Then the Duke spoke, and his voice was very quiet, and it carried to every corner of the marble hall. "You want to know what she is," he said. Eleanor stopped breathing. "She is the woman I intend to marry," said the Duke of Merrick, "before God and before the Tun, and before every gossiping coward in this county." not to mend a scandal, not to spite you, because I love her, Vane, which is a thing you have never felt and never will, and which is why you thought her a stake and I knew her a treasure." He took a step forward, and the men behind Lady Halstead fell back before him. "You called her a card table trollop in my house. You will leave it now, and you will print a retraction, and you will do it, because if one more word touches her name, I will call you out and put a ball in you on Hampstead Heath at dawn, and there is not a man in England who does not know I am the better shot." The silence that followed was absolute, and into it, from the top of the stairs, Eleanor descended, slowly, in her one good gown, with her chin up and her bare hands steady at last, and every face turned to her, and she walked past Lady Halstead, and past the trembling witnesses, and past Lord Ambrose Vane, who had gone the colour of ash, and she stopped before the Duke of Merrick, in the centre of the great cold hall, and she looked up into the face she had once thought would only ever take from her. "You did not ask me," she said softly, so that only he could hear. "No," he breathed. "I have never had the courage. Ask me instead. Ask me for anything. I will give it, whatever it is, all of it." "Then give me your hand," Eleanor said, and the Duke of Merrick, who had staked his entire fortune on her worth, in a room full of jackals, gave her his bare hand there in front of them all, and she took it, and held it, and Lord Vane turned on his heel, and left the house he could no longer poison, and the great doors closed behind him on the sound of the rain. They were married in the spring, in the little grey church at the edge of the estate, with the tenants crowded into the pews and the conservatory's first roses in Eleanor's hands. The ton, which loves nothing so much as a scandal, discovered in time that it loves a reversal even more. A duke who had defied every rule for love, a merchant's daughter who had brought a shuttered house back to life, and one by one, the doors that had closed swung open again, though by then, neither of them cared very much which doors opened and which stayed shut. Lady Halstead never called again. The shrouds came off the closed wing of Merrick Hall, and the rooms where a cold marriage had died stood open now to the light, and the children who eventually filled them never knew that the house had ever been anything but happy. Eleanor learned to use his name. She said it in the mornings, before the servants woke, when he came in from riding the estate, with the cold dawn still on his coat, and the guard entirely gone from his eyes. She said it in the library at the hour they still, out of long habit and longer love, came each evening to find one another. Julian. It fit through the door in her heart now as smoothly as the key had once turned, in the lock of a room she no longer needed to lock. He told her once, years on, sitting in the golden light of the conservatory she had made, that he still did not fully understand what he had done that night, why he had risen from his chair and staked everything he had on a girl he had never met. "I do," Eleanor said. She was watching the roses. "You had spent your whole life being told you were a thing to be endured, and you saw a man about to sell his own daughter across a table, and something in you could not bear to watch one more person be counted as worth less than money." She turned and looked at him, at the scar gone silver with age, at the eyes no longer guarded against her. "You did not save me, Julian. You just refused, for once, to let cruelty win. I was only the woman standing where the cruelty was pointed." He was quiet a while. Then he reached across the small distance between their chairs, and he laid his bare hand over hers, palm to palm, the way she had first laid hers over his in a firelit room a lifetime ago. And he held on, and the morning light came golden through the glass, and neither of them spoke, because after so many years, they no longer had to. "And I wonder, as I leave them there in the warm light with the roses climbing all around, if a stranger had risen from the shadows of the cruelest room you had ever stood in, and staked everything he owned, simply to set you free, and ask nothing in return, would you have dared to believe it? Or would you, like Eleanor, have spent those first long nights waiting for the trick, bracing for the price, only to find that the price was, at last, to let yourself be loved? Tell me in the comments what you would have done, and if Eleanor's story warmed some quiet corner of your heart tonight, stay with me, subscribe, and let us find our way together into the next tale by the next fire very soon.